Welcome to the Conservative Party conference in Manchester, where in this disused railway station turned conference centre, questions about the future of the high-speed rail line HS2 continue to dominate. This is Politics Live. Joining me, Conservative Party Chairman Greg Hands, former Conservative advisor Anita Boateng, New Statesman political editor Andrew Marr, and for the first part of the programme, former Cabinet Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg. Today, is Rishi Sunak giving up on bringing HS2 to Manchester?
Absolutely not. We've got spades on the ground on HS2 as we speak, and we're getting on and delivering it.
Well, I think it'd be a great tragedy, as I've said, to cancel HS2. It's the biggest levelling up project the country has got.
We think that we spend our money better than the government can.
We'll ask Jacob Rees-Mogg what he thinks about the highest tax burden since World War II. As doctors' strikes continue this week, is there any end in sight?
The BMA leadership is not on the side of change, and they are not on the side of patients.
The Home Secretary recently said multiculturalism had failed. What did she mean?
We have a great multi-ethnic society, and in many parts of our country, integration has worked. But there are also many towns and cities around the United Kingdom where it hasn't.
Welcome to today's Politics Live, and let's continue the conversation about HS2, because there is still no clarity, even with interviews with the Prime Minister earlier today. Let's just show you this headline in The Eye. Tory rebellion grows as Prime Minister scraps HS2 in the north, is the headline. So my opening question to the panel here is, should Rishi Sunak announce the scrapping of the leg from Birmingham to Manchester here in Manchester?
Well, look, Joe, no decision has been made. Government properly makes decisions in an orderly way. It'll be a matter for the Prime Minister, the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Transport Secretary, but that decision hasn't been made.
Right, or you just don't know?
No, it genuinely hasn't been made. Of course, we're listening, we're talking to people about it, we're looking at particularly making sure we get value for money on HS2, incredibly important. But worth bearing in mind, the project is being built at the moment. There are spades in the ground.
Oh, don't use that expression, spades in the ground. Maybe that's the problem. It's not going to work with just spades in the ground, is it? Anita, should the announcement, which everybody thinks has been made unofficially, informally, should it be made here in Manchester?
Well, I think at this point you've got to grasp the nettle. I personally think that the final phase is really important and it should continue. But if you are going to end it, then it's no one's fault, remember. This happened through an inadvertent official carrying a piece of paper that they probably should have had in a folder somehow.
But the government
then
could have
it got
gripped it,
snapped.
couldn't it?
And that's how this conversation has sort of unfolded. So, I mean, that personally, as a former advisor, is my idea of my worst nightmare. And because of that, it's led to this conversation happening in the open when it would have happened privately. Yeah. So I think at this point, number 10 is sort of going to have to come to a moment, probably tomorrow, where it just says something quite definitive, when ideally they would have wanted to land this as part of the autumn statement or a broader programme around government spending.
It's gone on for days and days, weeks even. Should it be announced here finally?
If they've taken the decision, for goodness sake, please say so. I mean, it has been an absolute horlicks of media management, to use the phrase. Yeah. And I think, maybe Greg can help us with this. I think the Cabinet are supposed to be discussing this at some point this morning.
Greg?
There's no Cabinet meeting I'm aware of this morning, Andrew. No decision's been made yet.
No Cabinet. Well, I have a suggestion for the Prime Minister, which is I had Andy Street on my LBC show yesterday.
Yes, the Birmingham Mayor.
And he has said, as West Midlands Mayor, he will get together all the leading political figures in the North, particularly Conservative ones, all the business leaders in the North, and he wants to meet the Prime Minister and discuss how to radically cut the costs, using the private sector to cut the costs before he takes a decision. And I think Rishi Sunak should stand up tomorrow and say, do you know what, I've listened to Andy Street and I agree, I'm going to have one last go with all the big voices in the North before I finally take the decision.
What do you think? Should it be announced here?
Well, if it were done when 'tis done, 'twere well it were done quickly, I think are the words that come to mind. It's always best and advisable for governments to make decisions sooner rather than later. Because as Andrew was saying, you otherwise get an endless media round of, is it happening, isn't it happening?
Yeah.
Let's cut it. The sooner it's cut, the better. It's a staggering waste of money. It's a bad scheme, massively over budget, and it would be a proper and bold act for the Prime Minister to do, and courteous of him to announce it in Manchester.
Right. Should he not have done the interviews he did this morning and just waited until tomorrow to make the announcement?
Well, Prime Ministers have to do interviews. If he hadn't done the interviews, you'd say, why has the Prime Minister gone into hiding?
Yeah, but
so
today...
I think, of course, he should do interviews at the party conference.
Anita, is there something we're missing? We've been discussing in the newsroom, is there a sort of double bluff going on here? Is there some bit of strategy that actually we haven't thought of that's going on with this HS2 announcement?
No.
Right.
I think that there is an element of sometimes from the outside, these things look very, very simple. I actually think there are a lot of stakeholders, as you've mentioned, whether it's Andy Street, other businesses in the region. There are other things the government will want to say about investment in the north, which is obviously hugely important. And it's just unfortunate that the normal wranglings of government that take place behind the scenes when you've got DFT and HMT and Number 10 are having to play out in this way, with everyone therefore able to sort of rally the metro mayors and have a statement.
I mean, it's more than unfortunate. This is supposed to be the springboard conference for an election next year, either early next year or later next year, and it has been completely overshadowed.
Or derailed.
Derailed. Very good.
Yes.
Very good.
Oh, well.
I mean, I would say yes, but I think Rishi Sunak's speech tomorrow is still going to be the most important moment of conference and the bit that sort of defines him as Prime Minister and who he is as Rishi Unleashed. So I think that at the moment we need something to talk about, right? It's party conference. When that happens, I think that will set a different tone as well.
Well, it's certainly provided ongoing conversation. Let's talk about something else, because Jacob Rees-Mogg, you've just come from a fringe event titled Restore Conservatism. This is the headline in the Daily Express. Two former Brexit ministers, that's you and Lord Frost, hijack Tory conference to form alliance against Rishi Sunak. You're laughing. Is that because it's true?
No, it's because it's gloriously, in a way only the Daily Express ever does, overwritten. We weren't hijacking the conference. We were saying things I think the Prime Minister would almost certainly agree with. We were making the case for conservatism based on the individual building up through the families to a community, rather than the socialist equivalent of putting the collective first. We were making a case for how conservatism works, and starting with the philosophies of conservatism and then getting into where do you go politically in policy terms.
But the title Restore Conservatism sounds like it's been lost under Rishi Sunak.
The title, we're only quoting half of it, was Restore Prosperity, Restore Conservatism. We need more of both. And to get more prosperity, we need more conservatism.
Right. You have, along with other leading figures in the party, signed the pledge, the tax pledge, to oppose any more tax rises. That was on the eve of the conference when it started. So does that mean, in the autumn statement, if the Treasury books calculate that the overall tax burden has gone up by £10, you'll vote against it?
What we have agreed, the 30-odd MPs,
yes,
some might say 30 very odd MPs have agreed, is that the burden of taxation of a percentage of GDP should not rise by decisions made in the budget. That is the point. Now,
so you'll vote against it if it does?
Well, we're not going to vote against something on ABR figures because they're always rubbish. The ABR's always wrong. But if the government were to put up income tax, yes, of course we'd vote against it.
Yeah, well, income tax is one thing. You've said anything in terms of any more tax rises, so you're not putting your money where your mouth is in terms of opposing it.
If it puts up the burden of taxation as a percentage of GDP, that is what we will oppose. That doesn't mean the government can't cut in one area and raise in another. It can adjust the burden. But it is clear that we will not vote. But no Conservative wants the burden of taxation to rise from a 70-year high.
Well, no, absolutely. What do you make of experts? In fact, we can show the headline, the Evening Standard. Rishi Sunak set to preside over biggest tax-raising parliament on record, say experts. That must make you cross.
Well, it doesn't make me cross. And I think, actually, I probably am very sympathetic to the position the Prime Minister's in, because I believe in tax cuts. And I also believe, and Greg does, is an absolute exemplar of belief in this, in sound money. And I think the government should be spending less money to pay for tax cuts. I'm not advocating a great giveaway. I think there are some taxes that you could cut because they either raise trivial amounts of money or they're so economically disadvantageous that you would make up the loss of revenue. That's a particular category. Yeah. But I wish we could raise the thresholds for the 40p rate and the 20p rate. But I accept the government's position that that isn't currently affordable.
Right, well, so what's the point of making a big stand on things like a tax pledge? If you agree with everything the government's doing, why on earth are you signing?
Because we don't want any more tax rises, and we need to see, this is why HS2 is so important, we need to cut wasteful expenditure, and then we can pay for tax cuts.
Is it helpful, all of this, for Rishi Sunak, Anita?
Well, the Conservative Party conference has always been this, a great ideas factory where lots of different political perspectives are shared. The Conservatives do like debate, right? We can't really help it. And I don't think that actually, when you look at the grand story of this conference, it's actually going to be about this pledge, as interesting as it is. I think it's actually going to be about the idea of Rishi Sunak showing a little bit more of himself and what that really means, and us getting some more definition about that.
Right.
So I think we always get very excited about the fringes and Liz Truss and the growth thing happening.
Well, you mentioned Liz Truss.
Yeah,
I mean, Andrew Marr, can you remember a time when a former Prime Minister actually held a fringe event and espoused policy that was directly in opposition to what Jeremy Hunt was saying on issues like tax cuts at a party conference before?
Not for a while. I'm sure it's happened, but not for a while. And of course, what she was calling for was corporation tax to be cut to 19%, and then below that. But I thought one of the interesting things about that fringe event was the biggest applause as people coming into the room was actually for Nigel Farage, who is going around the conference absolutely thrilled, and he feels that he's getting his way inside the Conservative Party. So I have a helpful question, both Jacob and for Greg. Would Nigel Farage be welcome back inside the Conservative Party?
I'm a friend of Nigel's. I think he's a very effective campaigner, and I think most of his political views are views I share. I think Nigel is broadly a Tory and always has been.
Right. Yes,
well, if he wanted to join, I can't think his membership would be refused.
Look, I think he's most recently been advocating voting for another political party. That is not consistent with being a member of the Conservative Party.
Right, well, that's not the question. Let's just show some pictures. I think they're from last night. Everyone looking very jolly and cosy. Let's have a look. Priti Patel, yes, Priti Patel there, the former Home Secretary, with Nigel Farage. Let me just repeat the question from Andrew. The question was, would you welcome Nigel Farage into the Conservative Party?
No, I don't think I would, because I think he's repeatedly, for the last 30 years or more, advocated voting for other political parties. I think he said he doesn't want to see the Conservative Party succeed, so I don't think I would.
But we're always delighted if people cross the floor. If a Labour member who'd been a Labour member for 30 years and came across and said, I'd like to be a Tory, we'd be absolutely thrilled to pieces.
I think
there is more joy in heaven over the one sinner who repenteth. And if Nigel is the repentant sinner, we should put down the red carpet.
It's a yes from, I think,
the Bible and Shakespeare in one go. Can I just make it? I think there is a discipline point, however, here inside the Conservative Party. Lord Cruddas, who is a Conservative peer, taking the Conservative whip, speaking to Conservative donors, suggested that they should defund the Conservative Party. But how is that acceptable?
OK, but Andrew, the important thing is that I don't think he's having any effect. We've had a record year of fundraising for the first half of this year. Lord Cruddas has not been one of our donors for some time. So I would say John could say what he likes, if you like, but we are succeeding in turning around the financial position of the party in the first half of the year. We're doing very well on donors.
And what do you feel about the Conservative Democratic Organisation?
Well, the CDO, I mean, of course, look, I'm the chairman of the party. I represent a party that's a broad church of people. I'm relaxed about the CDO.
I do think sometimes we confuse interest in fringe events with, like, the mood and sense of the party. I mean,
although the CDO is not a fringe event in that sense, it is a group within the party.
Of course, but, like, we have huge turnouts for all sorts of events at party conference because they're interesting and intriguing. I spend a lot of time with members, and I've got to say, like, they like debate and discussion, and they don't necessarily all heave to one view, and I think that's a mistake we sometimes make when we're on panels like this.
Sorry, beg your pardon. Can I raise a bigger point? in a sense, or more general point, which is that I get the sense in this conference so far, and it is not just a Tory thing, I think the same will happen at Labour, that there's less excitement actually in the main hall with the main speakers than there is on the fringe events. And one of my theories about this is that we've got a generation of politicians who, when confronted by 500 people in a room and a platform, don't quite know how to conduct themselves or what to do. We have lost that conference rhetoric that we used to rely on.
Well, Jacob, do you think that's true?
He's not one of the examples I'm thinking of.
No, but do you think it's true of your colleagues?
I'm not sure. I think this is an issue about how the conference is structured and what you're trying to do. I do think the structure we used to have of genuine debates that were answered by ministers on motions sent forward by constituency associations involved local members more, whereas currently it's grandstanding by ministers, which isn't necessarily very exciting.
But to go to Anita's point about the fringe events, Liz Truss, there was a huge queue for the former Prime Minister. She was voted for by grassroots Conservatives, unlike Rishi Sunak, the current Prime Minister. Do you think the party was on a better course under Liz Truss this time last year, Jacob Rees-Mogg, when you agree on her tax-cutting agenda and fracking?
It didn't work.
It didn't, no, absolutely.
So, you know, we are where we are. We've got to back the Prime Minister. We all want to win the election. I disagree with Lord Cruddas, who I admire greatly, and I like CDO. I'm in favour of keeping the vote for the leader with party members, all those sorts of things. But Conservatives want to win the election. Otherwise, there's no point in being a Conservative. And to think of changing leader again would be utter madness. So we must row in behind Rishi Sunak. And let's hope he makes an absolutely barnstorming speech tomorrow and has queues from all over Manchester waiting to get in.
What about your comments leading up to the Brexit referendum and beyond? You said time and time again, what we need are freedoms, Brexit freedoms, to have cheaper food.
Yes.
You repeated what you said. Say again what you would like to see in terms of importing beef.
Oh, I'd be very happy to eat Australian beef, but it should be a matter of choice. Our protections on beef don't protect British farmers, they actually protect French farmers. Why are we discriminating against Australia in our tariffs on behalf of France and Ireland and Holland? It makes absolutely no sense, and consumers should have choice. And if they want to buy Australian beef, that should be a matter for them. And tariffs should come down quickly. We should get rid of tariffs. And one thing we absolutely shouldn't do, which we're proposing to do sometime next year, is more import controls on food from the continent.
Right, but you're calling for hormone-injected beef from Australia because it's cheaper.
If people want to eat it, they should be free to.
Andrew?
I rather agree with that, I have to say. I don't know much about hormone treated beef, but you know, the Americans seem to survive on it, and many other cultures do as well.
If I just might come in, having been the trade minister at the time the Australia trade deal was negotiated, it's important that we do maintain our standards, but we are going to
maintain our standards?
We are going to take in more Australian beef that meets our standards, that is grown naturally without hormones. So
right.
We have solved that problem, keeping our standards, taking more Australian beef that meets our natural standards.
Well, I'll tell you who doesn't agree with you, which won't come as a surprise, and that's Minette Batters, who is the head of the National Farming Union. Let's just show her tweet. Unbelievable from Jacob Rees-Mogg, an absolute desire to annihilate British agriculture, totally and utterly morally bankrupt. One thing's for certain, the Aussies would have deported him if he were representing them. Well, what's your message to her?
Oh, this is absolutely...
And she's representing farmers.
Well, no, she's not. She's a complete protectionist, and she doesn't represent farmers well. I was visiting farmers in my constituency last week, and the successful farmers in North East Somerset can compete globally because they are producing effectively and cheaply and economically, and they're investing. Minette Batters and the NFU, what they want to do is hold agriculture back in a protectionist fortress that means that you allow inefficient farming to carry on. You make it harder for the efficient farmers because they don't get the capital they want to invest. Protectionism hurts farmers and consumers. It puts prices up and it encourages inefficiency. What she is doing is a disservice to farming.
Right, and when we have Minette Batters on,
you can put that
those
to her.
comments to her.
The NFU is a pure protectionist organisation. It doesn't defend the interests of farmers.
If I might come in, if I might sort of defend, I think the NFU do a good job, actually, of backing British farming. But what we are doing is making sure we maintain our food standards, high food standards, while still doing trade deals around the world that enable, as Jacob says, our farmers to export. CPTPP, the new Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement, the UK will be the first country to join. that is going to be a big opportunity for UK farmers to sell into fast-growing Asian markets. That is what we're trying to do, is maintain our standards, but increasing the ability of our farmers to export.
Yeah, well, people are worried about the maintaining of standards, and no doubt we'll hold your feet to the fire. We'll hold your feet to the fire on that issue. Jacob Rees-Mogg, thank you for joining us. Let's talk about doctors and the doctors' strike. Let's have a look at this headline. BBC News, 72-hour doctors' strike to cause extreme disruption. Well, as it would. This is because both junior doctors and consultants are on strike for 3 days this week in England. It's the first strike ever by both types of doctors. That happened last month, as we reported on the programme, but this 3-day strike is a significant escalation. The medical director of NHS England has said it will be extremely challenging for the health service. I'm hoping we can talk now to Dr. Emma Runswick. She is the Deputy Chair of the Council at the British Medical Association. She's joining us from St Peter's Square here in Manchester, just around the corner from the Conservative Party conference. Hello to you, Emma. Do you agree that this double strike by doctors, coming on top of the one we saw last month, will be extremely difficult for the NHS and for patients?
It's certainly challenging, but consultants, SAS doctors and junior doctors are all in hospitals today across the country providing emergency care in emergency departments, critical care settings like ITU and maternity, as well as inpatient services. And what will predominantly be affected are the elective care services, so surgeries, outpatient clinics and so on. And that's because we're very committed to patient safety, whilst maintaining that we have the right to take action in order to try and shift this government and end this dispute. If we don't do anything, then pay will continue to fall and be cut against inflation. We will continue to lose staff to abroad, where we are better paid and better valued, and we won't be able to give the care that we really want to give patients now and in the future.
Right, you use the issue of better pay abroad. The Prime Minister, you may have heard him, was on the BBC this morning, and he had a question for the British Medical Association. Let's just take a look and a listen.
So when you've got the BMA on your programme, I hope you asked them, did you ask them, why is it the government has fully accepted the recommendations of an independent body, not me, an independent body, who said that the doctors should get a 9% pay rise, which, by the way, is more than the nurses, more than hospital porters, more than anyone else in the public sector, and they've refused. So why is that that's okay for them when everyone else in the public sector has accepted the recommendations of an independent body and gone on with it? They haven't. And why the government has put record funding into the NHS? That's the question for the BMA.
Emma, what's your answer to Rishi Sunak?
So we don't have any faith in the pay review process for doctors. It's been heavily meddled with since 2008 and consistently given us below inflation pay awards, including pay freezes, or indeed been ignored by the government several times over. So we know that unless there's significant pay review body reform, which is part of our set of demands, then we won't ever be able to regain or reverse the pay cuts, restore the pay of doctors. And to be honest, even if we were in a position where we thought it was independent, the fact is that we've got wages twice the salary in Ireland or Australia or New Zealand, and we are losing our staff. And if we want to provide good care for patients now and in the future, we need to retain them. And at the moment we're not retaining them, so we have to do something. All right. Or else we'll continue to get worse.
Emma, stay with us out there if you can. What do you say to that last point of Emma's in terms of pay and pay restoration?
Well, first thing I'd say, Joe, is that I think most members of the British public and potential patients, those on NHS hospital waiting lists, want to see doctors in hospitals, not demonstrating outside Conservative Party.
So they might say it's up to you to bring these strikes to an end.
Well, look, I mean, as the Prime Minister's laid out, it's been the most generous pay offer. It's recommended by the independent pay body. That has been the independent pay body that's been there for some time. The demand from doctors for a 35% pay rise is just, I think most of your viewers would think that is both unaffordable and unfair on other public sector workers and on the taxpayer.
You're part of the government. Can you tell our viewers what's happened to doctors' pay under Conservative government since 2010?
Well, in terms of the overall pay, Overall pay has been competitive. We also, just contrary to what has been said, the number of doctors in this country is at a record high.
Yeah, but that's not what I was asking. I was asking
that's
about...
also
I'm not saying it isn't important, but doctors' pay, I'll give you the figures. Junior doctors' pay has fallen by 14% since 2010. Pay for consultants has fallen by 15% since 2010. And these are real terms figures, taking account of inflation from the Nuffield Trust. So you will accept what Emma is saying is right. Pay has fallen consistently and continually since 2010.
I'm not going to accept that because I don't have the figures in front of me.
These are the Nuffield Trust figures.
What I would say is that the current pay demand for 35%, I think, is just not affordable, and I think is out of kilter with the other public sector, particularly the NHS workforces.
I think there is a big gap between what's going on with junior doctors and consultants. The real danger for the NHS, the real danger for patients, is when we had consultants and junior doctors going on strike together. And I see the consultants are now talking about sitting down with the government up to November or so forth and having no strikes before that. I think that's very important because, again, Nuffield Trust figures, senior doctors are about middle of the pack. They're actually paid more in relative terms, if you take everything into account, than their colleagues in most European countries.
Right, and in terms of actually some sort of mediation service, Emma, if you can still hear me, what about junior doctors making that same offer as consultants and actually saying, if the government will go with mediation between you and the junior doctors, you'll stop the strikes?
Well, we offered ACAS mediation back in April for junior doctors. We've been talking to ACAS well ahead of that back in December last year. We're prepared at any time to get around the table and talk. That's what we've been seeking throughout this dispute because we won't resolve it without negotiation. But when we've faced serious pay cuts, not just that you've described, but the Nuffield figures start in 2010 and our pay cuts in real terms started in 2008. So by RPI, junior doctors have lost 26% of their pay. And when you're facing that, it's just maths. To reverse that, it takes large numbers. We want to be paid just what we were paid in 2008 and we'll talk anytime, anywhere. They could walk out of the conference centre now and talk to us if they wanted to resolve this.
Right. Right, your line is a little bit wobbly, but we'll keep going with it. But will you call off the strikes? If the government said, we'll meet, would you call off the strikes?
So what junior doctors are looking for to call off strikes is a credible offer, but we're happy to talk at any point, even when there are strikes on the table. What consultants are saying is that given a pause in the calling of strike action, there is no further excuse for the government to refuse to get around the table and negotiate.
Anita, how are these strikes going to end?
I think they're going to end the same way that they've ended with the nurses and with every other public sector and private sector body that's been striking, which is through, at some point, the strikes end, at some point there's another conversation, and at some point...
But without any further movement either on a pay offer from the government or sitting around and actually negotiating, or what, the doctors giving up?
Well, I think that if we see what happened, I mean, Wales are now balloting for action. So we've got, like, you know, obviously Labour-led in Wales. Northern Ireland, there are potentially going to be ballots too. I think that there is a kind of an exhaustion that is kind of creeping in, both in terms of for the doctors, I imagine, but also from the general public. And I'm hoping that that sort of moves us towards a resolution. Now, we can't forget that so far since December, 1 million people have had operations and routine appointments cancelled, and that is continuing to accelerate. So I'm hoping that everyone just gets a little more impatient and everyone just gets a little more flexible, and that we can resolve this, hopefully, before the winter.
Right, well, I'll put that to Emma in a moment. But Emma, I'd like you also to respond to this rather arresting headline in The Independent. I'll read it to you. NHS pays doctor £7,900 to cover striking colleagues. How is that ethical?
It's the market rate for doing, you know, complex surgery in the middle of the night when you're already doing over your hours normally to cover your colleagues. Then people don't want to do those shifts, and therefore they're entitled to demand high rates for them. It's the kind of rate that you would expect. You know, BMA rate cards are less than that, but you know, we recommend that they charge. For non-contractual work over £100 an hour if you're a consultant, it's not unreasonable. It's what you'd expect to pay a plumber or a solicitor for emergency work. And that's what's happening. If they want to stop spending that kind of money, they need to get around the table and negotiate so that we don't have to go on strike anymore.
Or are you just cashing in on the strikes with those sorts of figures? I mean, they're unbelievable, £7,900.
It is unbelievable, and yet that's clearly the value that the hospital has put on that work. It's clearly work that we can't do without, and therefore some doctors are attempting to negotiate for that rate. If it wasn't a strike, we wouldn't have doctors being able to negotiate those rates for themselves. And I just want to come back on the point about people getting exhausted.
Sorry, I think we're slightly losing your line. I mean, that figure, it would be cheaper to increase the pay offer, surely, than have those sort of rates being paid for emergency cover.
Well, look, let's go back to where we started on this, that this is an independent pay body is recommending this figure, the 9% figure, which, by the way, is 10% for a junior doctor in year one. The demand here is for a 35% pay rise. It's a final offer that we've made. We're happy to talk to doctors about other things, other conditions of service, other issues that there are. But, you know, the rest of the NHS has settled and settled for less than this. We think we're behaving entirely reasonably. And I think the public are a little bit alarmed at seeing doctors camped outside here rather than in hospitals.
Andrew?
I think the public have less sympathy for consultants than they do for junior doctors, but I think we also have to accept the sort of human side of this, that most doctors have had an incredibly hard time during the pandemic. They're exhausted, they're worn out, they're tired, they're frustrated, and they're quite angry. I think the government is going to have to move because there are also people, there are people all of us rely on.
Political question, because there has been an accusation that the strikes, the protests here are because of the Conservatives being in government. But is there any evidence? I mean, Labour hasn't said that they would pay any more. They're sticking to very tight fiscal sort of envelope, and actually those strikes could continue under a Labour government.
Well, Wes Streeting has already absolutely infuriated the Doctors' Union, and they don't, I mean, he talks endlessly about reform. He is not somebody, I think, who's going to have an easy time. If Labour are in power next year or the year after, you might very well see NHS people protesting outside then as well, Joe.
Thank you to Dr. Emma Runswick there outside of the conference centre. Let's talk about immigration and the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. She made a controversial speech a couple of weeks ago in Washington about multiculturalism. Today she's been on a visit in Bolton at a lads and girls club, talking to people there and having a go at table football. I'm not sure she was that good at that. But anyway, yesterday Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick said this at a fringe event here at the party conference.
Where I think we've gone wrong is that immediately after leaving the EU, we established a legal migration system that was, if anything, more liberal than the system that we had when we were in the European Union. The model that we've adopted as a country is not working, and we can't continue it. And that's why we do need now to finish the revolution that we started with Brexit by not just taking back control of those levers, but actually exercising them so that we can make our own intelligent choices and reduce the amount of legal migration into the country.
So Robert Jenrick there. Let's welcome Sundar Katwala, Director of British Future. Just before I come to you, that's the immigration minister talking there. Since leaving the EU, the UK has implemented a points-based system, earning threshold and a list of shortage occupations to manage immigration. Has there been a mistake? Robert Jenrick seems to think it's all wrong.
Well, look, I think the government is absolutely committed to bringing immigration down. We need to do more. That is our commitment to do that.
It's gone up, of course, hasn't it?
But it has gone up, but we would, well, obviously a lot of those figures that you've been looking at will be influenced by the pandemic, those pandemic years of 2021. Of course, it's gone up since then. But we do need to bring down immigration. That is what the government is committed to do.
Right, to what level?
Well, I'm not going to set a level on that, Joe,
right.
But I do think that it is too high at the moment, both legal and illegal immigration.
Right, so is Robert Jenrick right? Do you agree with him that the system as it's set up, I mean, the reason we have those shortage occupation lists is because we don't have enough people doing particular occupations here in the UK. Is that the wrong system?
No, I mean, Robert is one of the most thoughtful people at the cabinet table.
Sure.
And he will be looking at this with the Home Secretary and looking at how we can change this, change the actual practical workings of this, where immigration is simply too high at the moment.
Right, well, net migration figures for the year ending December 22, 606,000. That is the highest level in recent years. But even in December 2018, it was 330,000, just over. I mean, have you just lost control of immigration?
No, we haven't, but immigration is too high.
Is it too high?
606,000 is a very high number. It's exceptionally high for exceptional reasons. So many Ukrainians, so many Hong Kongers came. It's also high because of the choices Boris Johnson's government made. So it will settle at net 350, net 400, because they've decided to have more NHS visas, more social care visas for students to be able to stay. What I think Robert Jenrick is saying is that the policy choices made to liberalise non-EU immigration need to be looked at and reversed. So he's changing his mind about what have been consensus policies, I think, across the parties about post-Brexit immigration.
I mean, it's quite interesting listening to Robert Jenrick talking about the very policies that he oversees as part of the Home Office and saying that they're wrong, they're not working.
I think the brutal summary is immigration is too high because we've made it too high, says Minister. But I think we should not confuse that. We started off with Suella Braverman on multiculturalism having failed. Very, very interesting. When Rishi Sunak was asked about this, he could not say that he agreed with her, and instead he told his own story, which is, of course, a very unusual story, but also a story of highly successful integration and multiculturalism.
Yeah, do you agree with Suella Braverman that multiculturalism has failed, Greg?
I wouldn't really look at it like that. I would actually say that I think Britain, we've got an amazing society. We've got an amazing society where, you know, as Kemi Badenoch said, it's the best place in the world to be black is in Britain. And I think our society has been a huge success.
Right, well, let's just show that headline, actually, what you've just said. It was Kemi Badenoch, the Business Secretary, talking about International Trade Secretary, talking about Britain is the best country to be black in. Do you agree with that, Anita?
I haven't been to every country, but I think there are definitely lots of advantages that we don't really appreciate sometimes from inside the UK, that you can come from any community. So my parents came over from Ghana, a country that was colonised by the British, and there are lots of opportunities and lots of ways that aspiration, which is the beating heart of the Conservative Party, actually can be made a reality for lots of people from very different backgrounds. You know, my mother was a cleaner, and the kinds of opportunities that I have gotten as a result of living in England, I don't think I would have gotten, for instance, in Ghana. So I think there's a lot to be said. And actually, Rishi Sunak has said the same for the ways in which Britain do stuff well. And sometimes we tend to be a bit down on the opportunities that Britain presents.
In our research, 3/4 of black and Asian people take the common sense view that Kemi Badenoch's right, you can't really find somewhere that's doing much better, and we've got much more to do because the progress we've made hasn't completed the job for equal opportunities. Most people are balancers who know that those two things can be true at the same time.
Well, perhaps with a slightly different view. Let's listen to this is from a fringe event here at the conference, the Conservative MP, Tom Hunt.
Being frank, it is not xenophobic to, when you walk into your town centre, to not want to feel like you're living in a foreign country. I don't think that makes you a xenophobe. I think that makes you somebody who wants to live in a community with shared values.
Is that xenophobic?
I think where he gets it wrong is when he's looking at what it looks like. You've got a fifth of us are British, often born British, with darker skins. I'm mixed race, black and Asian skins. So if it looks like a foreign country to the mix, you should have debates about how we get integration and cohesion right, that white people, Asian people and black people can agree, let's work on what brings us together across a multi-ethnic Britain now, because we shouldn't be putting people in different boxes in that way.
Were those comments xenophobic?
I think they were pretty close to the edge, particularly the anger in his voice. You've got to be very, very careful with wolf whistles. The only other thing I'd say is it possible, do you think, that Suella Braverman says one thing about multiculturalism, which is really important to our existence as a country, and Kemi Badenoch says something radically different? Anything to do with a future Labour Conservative leadership contest? Perhaps.
Maybe.
Maybe, I think so.
Is that what they're doing? Dress rehearsal for a leadership contest?
I think Kemi is someone who is very forthright with her views and has always talked about issues like race and gender and talked about her experience in a very authentic way. I think I'd be surprised if we had a conference fringe event and a whole conference season where we didn't hear Kemi's views on that, especially as the Secretary of State who's responsible for equalities.
Right. I mean, it's difficult, though, isn't it, when Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, says something about multiculturalism that nobody else I've spoken to here in senior government seems to agree with?
Well, look, I think from this discussion, I think we can say that the UK has been a big success. I see around the cabinet table. I never saw it in previous Labour governments.
But this was signed off by number 10. This speech by Suella Braverman.
It can't be both failed and also the best place to be a black person in from a Conservative point of view. I mean, those two things cannot both be true.
I mean, the thing I would say is that Greg just mentioned the fact that our Foreign Secretary is black, our Home Secretary is black. I think there are, our Prime Minister is from an ethnic minority. And I think that that you allowed in public life when that happens to have people from ethnic minority backgrounds who do not agree. And I think that's actually a sign of the fact that we are a developed and mature economy in which people do not have to represent one uniform view.
I certainly think people should debate Suella Braverman's arguments, not her identity. Multiculturalism meant many different things to different people at different times. We've definitely got more work to do on integration. It should be right to say that. But David Cameron told us it was finished 13 years ago. So a minister shouldn't now be making an opposition speech about what's failed. They should be telling us about the record of what we've been doing after multiculturalism, what we can do to promote more cohesion, what they're for, not just what they're against.
But I think cohesion is a much better place under today. And I'm not making a political point compared to 13 years ago, 20 years ago, 25 years ago. I think actually Britain is a much, much better place, and actually an exemplar. People come to this country, and I've long been an international-facing minister. I've been welcoming international guests to this conference, and people are really, really impressed with what Britain has done.
On the subject of cohesion, and I'll come to you, Andrew, in a moment, let's just take a look at this. Conservative London mayoral candidate Susan Hall, who'd be standing against Sadiq Khan, Labour's London mayor. Let's just have a look. It was filmed by Sky News.
I tell you something else, I know how frightened some of the community is because of the divisive attitude of Sadiq Khan. One of the most important things that we can do when I become Mayor of London is to make it safer for everybody, but particularly for our Jewish community.
Greg, what do you make of those comments? I mean, she's the Tory candidate for London Mayor. She's claiming Jewish communities are frightened by Sadiq Khan. You're a London MP. You'll no doubt be campaigning for Susan Hall. But, I mean, is that true?
OK, I wasn't there at that particular time, and I haven't seen the whole context. You've taken a little bit there.
Well, it's quite clear. She says, I'll tell you something else. I know how frightened some of the Jewish community.
I don't think it's right to say. I think the point generally is that in London we've got horrific levels of crime, knife crime in particular, violent crime in particular. I think all communities are actually under threat from the policies of Sadiq Khan. Because he's a very poor administrator and a very poor police crime commissioner for London and these kind of things. So I think the general point is that everybody, I'm afraid, is feeling it, and crime in my constituency crops up all the time.
But let's talk specifically about this. Is she right or wrong when it comes to the Jewish community?
She's wrong, and she shouldn't say that people in the Jewish community are scared of Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, who happens to be Muslim. Greg has just made a legitimate argument.
No, she didn't say that.
She said they're frightened of the divisive attitudes of Sadiq Khan. Where I think you should go further, Greg, and get back to the legitimate argument you made is the Board of Deputies have come out last night to say she shouldn't have said it because they've had nothing but friendship and respect. Lord Finkelstein has said it's a wrong comment to make. Andrew Boff said that the Zach Goldsmith campaign crossed the line in retrospect. They hope you've learned the lesson. Because of the divisive attitudes of Sadiq Khan.
Sandra just said she did say
but Jewish people in London aren't scared of the mayor. They can vote Conservative, they can vote Labour, they can vote Liberal Democrat. Muslims aren't scared of Rishi Sunak because he's a Hindu. Let's not bring division where it doesn't exist. Please ask her to withdraw the comments and make the critique you made.
Will you ask her to withdraw the comments?
I think we should look. I haven't seen the whole thing that she said, and I think that's been clipped, and she definitely didn't say what Sandra said because Sadiq Khan is Muslim.
But let me read what she said. I know how frightened some of the Jewish community is because of the divisive attitude of Sadiq Khan. Is she right?
Well, I think she's right if she means the whole of London, all communities, feeling under threat.
She said some of the Jewish community.
Because crime is too high. But I would need to see, I wasn't there, I need to see the whole thing You have an excerpt.
All right, well, you can perhaps catch up with after. We've only got a few seconds left. I'm so sorry, Andrew. I will be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 11:30 a.m. for the Prime Minister's speech to conference. Bye-bye.